You're not paranoid if it's your perception that Black people are the most shadow banned group on all social media platforms. It's an accurate assessment. Many studies have shown that social media platforms shadow bans Black people more than any other group. Whenever Black people post any information on social media platforms about systemic white racism and or that has any information has a potential of unifying and liberating us, Facebook blocks it, TikTok deletes it, Google hides it, YouTube bans it, the media censors it, and the white government forbids it. It's a reality that they keep many of us distracted from paying attention to. However, many have found that social media platforms restrict the visibility of postings by Black people, even when our postings do not violate posting guidelines. Many Black creators ran an experiment that showed that any entry using the word Black was blocked, while white supremacist labels were accepted. Many Black users have reported that conversations and information about Black Lives Matter protests were heavily shadow banned in 2020. Shadow banning is when platform administrators flag certain users and contents and reduce their reached audience. Platforms are unlikely to admit that they're doing this shadow banning or admit their bias, but if you pay attention, it's clearly obvious that postings by Black people are the most restricted contents on all social media platforms. And the practice is too widespread to be unintentional. It's being deliberately enforced. They don't want the Black population to ever learn the truth of what they actually did to us. We all know that they enslaved our ancestors, but that's only what they only want us to know. They did much more than just enslaved our ancestors. Unlike at the conclusion of World War II, when the less than 12-year Jewish Holocaust came to an end, when the U.S. government and the United Nations contributed massive financial support to rebuild their lives and restore their culture, there was no moral obligation to do the same for we Africans. Although the African Holocaust lasted hundreds of years longer and resulted in millions of more deaths, when slavery was abolished, America, Great Britain, and many other white nations that benefited from their brutal exploitation of Africans felt no moral obligation to restore the culture and the lives of Africans. They instead focused on their own self-interest by instead socializing Africans. Socialize is when the oppressors exploits their monopoly over information that are systematically fed into the minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that serves and protects the interests of the oppressors. White oppressive forces exploited their monopoly over the information that are fed into the collective minds of Black people, to socialize Black people, to think and behave in ways that benefits the white society. It's the true reason why many Black people now perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. Whenever the oppressed starts thinking and behaving in ways that are beneficial to the oppressors, it's always because the oppressed has been socialized to do so. People that have been socialized rarely, if ever, learns of this fact. This is the case regarding millions of Black people. Most don't know that we've been socialized. Those that are ignorant insist that our collective mindset that thinks in ways benefiting the white society is the result of the silly slave syndrome myth. Whenever people are kept ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense, because that myth presents what would in fact be the least effective and least plausible method used for controlling generations of millions of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing works. It's absolutely untrue. If you're still insisting that our collective minds have been manipulated to think in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serves the interest of the white society is by the Willie Lynch slave syndrome myth, you are absolutely wrong. And while people have the right, usually, to believe whatever they choose to believe, there's, however, a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all of our liberating remedies and strategies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. The truth of our plight and condition is that because the white society controls most of the information that are systematically fed into the minds of Black people, they've exploited this scenario to socialize the collective minds of Black people. They've socialized us to think in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serves and protects the interests of their white society. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the information that are fed into the minds of people, it's entirely possible to control what those people will think and how they'll behave. The socializing of Black people was deemed necessary because there's an immense concern of massive unified Black retribution that secretly exists amongst those white nations that have brutalized Africans and grossly exploited Africa's natural resources for more than 4 centuries. This immense concern of massive unified retribution resulted in white oppressive forces socializing Africans throughout the diaspora. Given the history shared between the white society and Africans, more specifically the brutalities inflicted upon Africans throughout history by the white society, to not have socialized Africans would have been against the interests of the white society. Therefore, accordingly and logically, they socialized Africans. It's how the white society protects itself from massive unified Black retribution. It allowed the white society to continue its subjugation of Black people without any significant Black resistance. It's especially necessary given the fact that the white society continues its oppression of Africans globally and continues its exploitation of Africa's natural resources. Those who insist that it's now ourselves that are our own worst enemies does so because they've been socialized to think as they now do. This isn't some feeble-minded conspiracy theory. It's the absolute truth. The socializing of Black people is being reinforced daily and unrelentingly through media subliminal propaganda programming. There are presently white men that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda that works unrelentingly behind the scenes, manipulating the collective minds of the Black masses. These men govern our minds, molds our opinions, and shapes our perceptions in ways that protects and serves the system of white supremacy. They determined a long time ago that by perpetually negatively distorting all of the narratives that Black people receives about ourselves, they could demoralize us, divide us, lower our collective self-esteem, and shift Black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards and against ourselves, thus preventing the Black masses from being able to unify ourselves against the white society. Furthermore, that doing so attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. This is our true reality. The time of believing and think that insults our own intelligence is over. We are now in the age of the awakening. This is the truth of our plight and condition. One love and peace.